So good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. We were truly delighted to have you with us today. My name is João Gomes and I work with Gunther in VKO office in Lisbon. And today we'll focus on the update on the Portuguese high-speed rail project. Over the next hour, our guests will offer valuable insights on the National Investment Rail Plan, with focus on high-speed lines, Oporto-Lisbon, Oporto-Vigo, and Lisbon-Madrid, and other projects that IP also make traditional procurement and also signaling and telecommunications. For more information and interaction with our guest, we invite you to participate on the Q&A session. So before we begin, let me quickly go over a few housekeeping rules to ensure everything runs smoothly. All participants are currently with camera off and sound muted to minimize background noise. Please keep it up. We encourage you to use the Q&A function immediately. So you'll find that your screens will gather all the questions and address them during the dedicated Q&A session at the end. So the webinar is also being recorded and all the registered participants will receive later the video link and the presentation. With us today, Helena Matos is a senior transport planner and project leader with over 18 years of international experience across Portugal, the UK, the US, Switzerland, and the Emirates. Currently serving as director of the High-Speed Rail Department and project manager for the Lisbon-Porto Vigo High-Speed Rail Project, she leads one of Portugal's most strategic transportation initiatives. Throughout her career, collaborating with all rail stakeholders, her focus has been on maximizing infrastructure investments, boosting operational efficiency, and enhancing passenger experience through sustainable and innovative rail systems. So without further delay, I ask Helena to join us today. Now, Helena, could you please turn on the camera? Thank you very much. So, then I leave you the floor. Thank you very, Helena.
Thank you very much, João, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today talking about our high-speed project and other rail investments that EP is preparing for the next years. So without further delay, I will start sharing my screen and show you a presentation that we prepared. As João said, this presentation will be made available to you. So don't worry if you don't have time to take notes on the slides. You will have the presentation in full. And of course, as João said, there's a Q&A session, but you will also have access to my email address. So if you have any further questions later on, please don't hesitate to email me. It will be a pleasure to respond to your queries. So before I dive into the Portuguese high-speed rail project, I just want you to give an overview what EP has been working on for the past 10 years. So we have been working under an investment program that is called Ferrovia 2020, that if we translate it to English is like Railway 2020. So you can see on the map, so this is the map of Portugal, and all the railway lines are represented on this map. So the ones that are colored are the corridors where we have been doing significant investments. So the key objective of this Ferrovia 2020 program was to improve the freight rail international connections, so between Portugal and Spain, in order to reduce transport costs and travel times, so to make sure that we can effectively take freight from the road and transfer it to rail. So during this program, we almost 1,000 kilometers of railways were intervened, and the estimated initial cost of this program was 2 billion euros, what for Portugal is of very significant amount, and taking into account that in the last decades, there was almost no investment on railways. So this program was huge, was very important to us to gain again some knowledge and to form people on this subject, on the railway. And we are almost completing all the works under this program. So the next plan is the National Investment Plan 2030. This is the plan that guides the investments for the next decade in Portugal, rail investments. So the National Investment Plan is a multi-sectorial sectorial plan. So not only for railways, but the investment that is forecast under this program for railways is very significant. As you see in this table, it's above 10 billion euros. And this is, of course, the initial estimate. Because, for example, if we take the high-speed line Porto-Lisbon, when the program was launched, the estimated investment was 4.5 million. Now, only this line is estimated to cost around 9 billion euros. So you see, this estimate will increase. So the forecast was a bit out, and the investments have escalated, not only for the high speed, for other projects, because of several reasons. As you know, the war, inflation, there's always a lot of reasons that make all these plans, from the initial investment to what exactly is spent, is a very significant difference. So you have here a list of all the projects that IP was mandated. So, by the way, Infraestruturas Portugal, that stands for Infrastructures of Portugal, is the railway infrastructure manager for Portugal. So we manage both roads and railways, so together. So what you see in here, so these are the projects that IP was mandated by the government to implement in the next decade. So the high-speed projects, Porto-Lisbon and Porto-Vigo, are some of the most important investments under this plan. But you have many other projects like electrifications, telematics, modernization of existing lines, increasing capacity and safety of existing metropolitan lines. So a lot of things. And at the bottom, the three bottom lines, these are investments that relate to the acquisition of rolling stock. So this is not with IP, but is with Comboios de Portugal, that is CP, that is the incumbent operator in Portugal. So this was to give you an overview of what is planned before we talk about the high-speed rail project itself. So the three corridors that are planned under this project are Porto-Lisbon, Porto-Vigo, and Lisbon-Madrid. So as you see, we are starting by building the Porto-Lisbon line. So it's the national line that connects the two largest cities in Portugal. So the development of this line has already started in 2025, when we signed the first concession contract for the construction of the first 70 kilometers of high speed. And our expectation is by the end of 2032, we will have completed this line. So the line that follows is the Porto-Vigo. So it's the first international link that will be built under the high-speed project, and is up to the north. It will connect to the region of Galicia. So the third project that will be implemented is the one that connects the two capitals of the Iberian Peninsula, that is Lisbon and Madrid. So what you see in there is the direct journey time. And why is this important? Because what we receive from the government is a mandate to build these lines, and they set an objective in terms of journey times. So based on this objective that is set by the government and is seen as the journey time that is going to be really effective and will allow us to bring people from the road to the railways. So based on this journey time that is the objective, we set the project characteristics. So for example, for the high-speed line Porto-Lisbon, to ensure a journey time of 1 hour and 15 minutes between Porto and Lisbon, we need to build a line for which the operational speed is going to be 300 kilometers per hour. For example, for the Porto-Vigo, because the direct journey time between Porto and Vigo is expected to be of 50 minutes, the line will be 250 kilometers per hour. So I will give you a bit more details about the Porto-Lisbon line. So as you see in here, so the between Porto and Lisbon, we are talking about almost 300 kilometers of new high-speed line. As I said, the line will be built for 300 kilometers per hour. So this new line will be fully integrated with our conventional railway system. And I have a slide after this one that explains why we are doing this. And the main objective of this line is to release capacity on our conventional network. So nowadays, the trains that run between Porto and Lisbon, they run on our most used line of our railway network, that is the North Line. So almost 92% of the freight trains that operate in Portugal, they use this line. And around 74% of all the trains, both freight and passenger, use this line. So we have here a big mix of traffics, is suburban, regional, long distance freight, and this eats up a lot of the capacity of this line. So the line is saturated. We cannot improve the journey times. We cannot increase the frequency of trains. So what we're trying to do is to take from this line the long distance trains that will start running on the high-speed line, and therefore we'll be able to release capacity on the conventional network to increase the frequency of other type of traffics. So the journey time between Porto and Lisbon, direct without stops, as I said, it will be of 1 hour and 15 minutes. So this compares to almost 3 hours. So today the fastest trains between the two cities takes 3 hours of journey time. So, of course, the reduction in journey time is not going to only affect the direct services, but it will also affect all the cities that will be served by this high-speed line, that is Leiria, Coimbra, Aveiro, and Gaia, on top, of course, of Lisbon and Porto. So we are using, in most of the cases, the existing stations that will be adapted to high speed, so to be able to accommodate the high speed services. And there will be 2 new stations, one in Gaia and one in Leiria. So, as I said, our high-speed line will be fully integrated with our existing network. So this is a system that is very similar to what exists in France, but is different, for example, from what our neighbors in Spain have done. So I will start by the example in Spain. So what they did is they built high-speed lines and they have installed the stations on the high-speed corridor. So these stations end up being a bit far away from the city center. And it was proved that this was not a great solution, because once a passenger takes his car to drive to the station, okay, he will go onto the highway and follow his trip to the destination instead of moving to the train. So this is why we wanted to use our existing stations, conventional stations that are already located in the city centers and are already considered to be transport hubs. Because I give you the example of Aveiro. So what is going to happen? So you see here in blue, this is the high-speed line. This is almost like a highway. So the high-speed line, and here you have here in orange, the existing conventional line. So what we're going to build is small connections between the 2 lines. So a train that is a non-stopping train will go through here, so not to lose time going to the conventional line. But a train that stops in Aveiro will leave the high speed, go into the yellow link, go to the station, and come back on the high-speed corridor. So once the train arrives in Aveiro, there's already a lot of suburban services, regional services that one can take from this station. So this increases the catchment area of our high-speed network. So another advantage of having this full integration is, for example, I can have a train that departs from Lisbon and goes all the way to Coimbra, and then once it gets out to Coimbra, gets on the conventional network, it doesn't come back to the high speed, but it takes the conventional network to Guarda, for example. So probably you have never heard about this city, but Guarda is 200 kilometers away from the high-speed corridor. But Guarda will benefit from the high-speed corridor because of the journey time reduction between Lisbon and Coimbra. So again, we are increasing the catchment area of our high-speed system, and this was very important to us to help gaining the popular, the population, their willingness to see this project. Because of course we are using a lot of money from taxpayers, so they want to make sure that they will benefit from this project, and not only the people living in the cities across the Atlantic corridor that are already the most developed cities. So here I have some of the key features of the project. So sorry, going back here to this first slide. So we are developing the project in 3 phases, as you can see in here, and the project is going to be delivered through the PPP model, so public-private partnership. So for phase 1 and 2 of the project, we have 3 PPPs that are going to be delivered. So I will explain more about this model, but first I want you to talk about PPP1. That is the first section of the high-speed line Porto-Lisbon that has already been awarded. The contract was signed a year ago, and they are working on this. They should start the construction now during summer. So these are the first 71 kilometers of the high-speed line. Then it also includes some connections, you know, those yellow links that I showed you that connect to the conventional system. So we're talking about 17 kilometers. So the investment, we are here only talking about CapEx, investment on infrastructure, is around 2.4 billion for this first PPP. And in terms of the type of infrastructure, this is the PPP with the longest lengths of tunnels. So it should be, we predicted in our preliminary design 11 kilometers of tunnels, but the concessionaire has optimized the alignment, and they should have around 7 kilometers of tunnels. And we have around 13 kilometers of bridges and viaducts, and 2 stations will be, one station Gaia will be built from scratch, and then Porto Campanhã station will be enhanced to receive the high-speed services. So the second PPP, is the second section of the high-speed line Porto-Lisbon to be built. So we are talking is a section between Oiã and Sur that is shown on this map. So again, the investment is around 2.4 billion euros. Here is a bit shorter in terms of the length of high speed, only 60 kilometers, and around 18 kilometers of those links to the conventional line. So here, because of the type of territory that is being covered by this section, the extension of tunnels should be really, really reduced. Probably none, but we have 25 kilometers of bridges and viaducts, and there will be interventions on the existing Coimbra station. So the third PPP, just to say that in terms of PPP2, the Oiã Sur, so we have received this month the proposals, the bids for this PPP, and we expect to award this contract yet this year, so before the end of this year. So PPP3, that is the third section of the high-speed line Porto-Lisbon, is the section between Sur and Lisbon. So here the investment is higher because we are talking about 130 kilometers of high-speed line, only 9 kilometers of connections to the conventional network, should be around 5 kilometers of tunnels and 31 kilometers of bridges and viaducts, and they should build a new station in Leiria. So here the investment, the CapEx linked to this PPP is around 3 billion euros. So, as I said, so we have decided, the Portuguese government, supported by some analysis done by Infraestruturas Portugal, have decided that the best way to develop our high-speed project was through the PPP model. So what type of PPP is this? So we are talking about the design, build, finance, and maintain type of PPP concession. So there are several reasons why we have opted for this model. So one of the main reasons is the optimization of available resources. So, as I said to you, just the Porto-Lisbon line that is expected to be developed during 7 years has a cost of 9 billion euros. So you remember that when I start my presentation, I showed a program that took us almost 12 years to implement and costed 2 billion. And the entire company was involved on this project. So for us to be able to deliver a project like the high-speed line, we would have to increase the number of internal resources, I would say 3-4 times the numbers what we have now. And we don't have that capacity. The market doesn't have that capacity. So we are passing a lot of the responsibility to the private sector. Okay, so this is one of the main reasons why we're doing this. The second one is that through the PPP, we believe that we reduce the project life cycle costs because you have a single entity that is responsible for the design, for the construction, and for the maintenance. So in this case, this company, while they are doing the design, they will think, okay, I need a design that is optimized so that my construction costs are not too high. So, but of course, when they are building this, they need to be high quality infrastructure, because otherwise they will have to maintain this infrastructure for 25 years. And the cost could be very high for this maintenance if the infrastructure is not built to the right standards. So this is why we think this model allows us to reduce the life cycle costs. And thirdly, because if we do the traditional procurement, the legal framework for this type of procurement is very strict. We don't have much ability to adjust the risk allocation. When we're talking about a PPP, the legal framework allows us to allocate the costs better. So we think, there are risks, certain risks that can be transferred to the private sector that otherwise would not be doing if we're doing through the traditional model. So one of the main characteristics of our PPP is that we have separated the substructure and superstructure. So this is part of the scope of the PPP, but the signaling and telecommunications are outside of the PPP. So when I talk about signaling and telecommunications, I'm talking about the systems themselves. Okay. Because, for example, when we talk about the towers for the antennas, the GSM antennas, those towers, they are included on the PPP, but the antenna itself is outside of the PPP. So what are the key features of this PPP model? So we are talking about contracts with a term of 30 years, where the concessionaire has the responsibility to do the design and the construction and certification of the infrastructure for a period of 5 to 6 years, depending on the risks and on the difficulty of the project they are doing, depending on the PPP. And then for the rest of the time is the availability phase, is the phase during when they should maintain the infrastructure. So why have we decided to split these 300 kilometers in 3 PPPs? Because we didn't want that the investment cost associated with these PPPs would go above the 3 billion euros, because then to finance these PPPs would be very difficult. Okay, so we tried to cap the investment cost of each one of these contracts to 3 billion euros per contract. So when we talk about the CapEx, the OpEx is really smaller compared to the CapEx, to the investment that is associated with this PPP. So what is under the contract scope? As I said, is the railway substructure, the superstructure, the connections between the high-speed and the conventional network, electrical substations, and passenger stations. So in terms of the payments to the concessionaire, so there's no demand risk, so there's nothing to do with demand risk. Demand risk is on our side, so the public side, and they are paid based on availability of the assets that they are building. So if the assets are fully available, up to a certain threshold, of course, because things sometimes go wrong, they get the full payments. If the assets start to, have a significant downtime, or it means a time that they are not operating, there will be penalties applied to the concessionaire on the payments they expect to receive from us. So if we look at the high-speed Porto-Lisbon project, not everything is going to be built through PPP model. There are other projects that will be done through the traditional procurement for different reasons. So, for example, the connections with electrical national grid are being doing separately. We have also some works we will be doing on the conventional network that are necessary to gain capacity on the conventional network. Those, because there's a big involvement, with the rail operators, the infrastructure managers. So it's complicated for a private sector partner to do this. So these are going to be done through the traditional procurement, where we, EP, have a much higher involvement on this type of procurement and during the implementation phase of these projects. So I will now move on to the high-speed line between Porto and Vigo. So again, this line is going to be built in 2 phases. So, of course, when we are building this line, because it's an international corridor, its development needs to be fully coordinated with Spain. Of course, we don't want to arrive with a high-speed line to the border and then don't have a continuation to Spain. The issue here, again, is we have a conventional line that assures this connection. Of course, it's much slower, but again, it's reaching its capacity. And this is one of the main corridors through which we transfer freight traffic between Portugal and Spain. So as I said, the objective of journey time here is to connect Porto and Vigo in 15 minutes. And currently the journey time is 2 hours and 20 minutes. Here there will be a lot of new stations. So the Porto station is the existing one, but there will be a new station at Sá Carneiro Airport, Braga, Ponte Lima, and Valencia. So the investment, the total investment on the Porto Vigo, so we don't know yet the structure in terms of PPPs, but it's going to be delivered through the PPP model again, but we don't know exactly how we're going to split this. But the total investment on this line is around 5 billion euros. We are talking about an extension of 112 kilometers. And because of the orography of the land in this particular part of the country, we expect that 50%, almost 50% of this line will going to be either tunnel or bridges and viaducts. So a much higher proportion than if we compare to the Porto-Lisbon line that I just explained. So finally, we have the Lisbon-Madrid line. So here, again, the development of this line needs to be coordinated with Spain. There is already an implemented decision that was signed by the two countries with the European Commission with the commitment to have this line ready until 2034. So the objective on our side is to connect Lisbon to the border in 1 hour, so that on the Spanish side it should take 2 hours, so you can connect the two cities in under 3 hours, just under 3 hours. So phase one of this project is already under construction because it's a freight traffic. So as I said, inside the Ferrovia 2020 program that I spoke, that was the first thing I spoke about in this presentation. So this was one of the corridors that was built under that program and is almost finalized. So what is needed to do now is the second phase that is between Lisbon and Évora. And there's a very important infrastructure that needs to be built for this phase two. There is a third bridge over the Tagus River. And I'm looking ahead, I have my head lifted because I have the Tagus River just here in front of me. So this is a bridge, I don't know if you have been to Lisbon, but we have two bridges on the Tagus River and we will build the third one in between these two bridges. So this line will also allow for the connection to the new airport that will be built on the south bank. It's called the Airport Luís de Camões. And there will be a new station in Évora as part of this line, and then one at the airport, and Lisbon is the existing Orient station. So I've got here some pictures of phase one of the Lisbon-Madrid. You see something odd on this picture, and this is because currently the line was built as a single track, but as you see, for example, here is very obvious on the picture on the far right side, bottom right side, that the infrastructure is already prepared. So then when the capacity requires, we will build another track. But for now, we have just built it for one as a single track. But this line is already under the certification process. So this is of the global project schedule. As you see, we have here a lot of lines to build. So I mentioned that the investment on the Porto Lisbon is around 9 billion. So the investment on the Porto Vigo, we're talking about phase one of around 5 billion euros. And if we look at the Lisbon Madrid, we're talking about 7 to 8 billion euros. So this is a lot of investment that is planned. And the period for the implementation of these lines is very short. So we're talking less than 10 years to implement all these lines. So, as I said, we are doing this through the PPP model. So, you see that is very similar. So, the schedule of each one of these projects. So, we do some preliminary studies. We Infraestruturas Portugal. Then we do the first environmental impact assessment. Once we have this environmental impact declaration, we release the tender for these PPPs, and then they have 5 to 6 years to build this infrastructure, to do the detailed design, the construction, and the certification. So, as I said, for signal and telecommunication systems, we have separate contracts. So we have already released the tender for the first contract. So you see here on the map, so highlighted in blue is the first is the coverage of the first signal and telecommunications contract. So the split was based on the location of the operational command center. So the bit in blue is coordinated by this OCC in Porto. So, and what is going to be done under this first contract is this section. So this includes new signal and telecommunication systems for the high-speed line, so greenfield, but also some interventions on the conventional line, so brownfield. And this is why, because the high-speed trains will run both, as I said, on the high-speed and on conventional networks, so that they are able to go to the stations in the conventional network, and also for these hybrid services that run both on high-speed and conventional line. So these are contracts for design and construction and for maintenance. So, and the split, you can see the split here on the slide. So the base price for this contract is 360 million. So this is by far the largest contract we have launched for this type of systems. What we expect is, so in terms of design and construction, is 269 million, and then 92 million for maintenance. I think in terms of maintenance, I know that it covers, I think, 10 years for signaling and a bit less for telecommunications, but I might be wrong. I can provide you these figures later. So the second contract is the one that covers the area highlighted in green. So again, greenfield and brownfield. So there will be interventions on both systems, the new high-speed and the existing conventional system. Here, the base price is similar. We are talking about 370 million for the base price, and we expect to launch the tender for this contract in the first semester of 2027. So I've got here just a final slide that I think, based on the context of this webinar, I thought it could be of relevance to you. So bidding for IP projects. So I guess you are here because we are interested in our projects, in our market, in our pipeline of projects. So I'm very glad to know about that. So where can you find our tenders? So all the tenders are published on this platform that is called nGov, and you have here the link. I will maybe try, let me see if this works well. This was not planned, but I will try and see if this works. Maybe, let me just, it's always easier when we show. So this is already for Infraestruturas Portugal, and you can see in here, so you can put it here in English, okay? And you can see all. So as you see, you have here all our tenders. So these are all the active tenders that we have. So you can see here, you have 125 live projects. You can see here all the projects we have. A lot of them, some are projects, other are acquisition of services, maintenance, construction. But one of the things you see in here is that all our tender documents are in Portuguese, and all the bid documents need to be submitted in Portuguese as well. So we don't accept documents written in English. Everything needs to be submitted in Portuguese. So we have some minutes for our contracts. So the terms and conditions of these contracts are standard and cannot be changed, because imagine that if you win a project with us and we want us to change some of the terms and conditions of our contracts, we cannot do that, because then this later on could be seen as advantage to you, and other bidders could have said, okay, but if I knew that we could change these terms and conditions, we would have bid with a different price because our risk will be different. So it's quite standard. And this is one of the reasons why I think is quite important for new market entry. So if it's the first time you are bidding in Portugal, the first time you are bidding with us, IP, it's quite convenient to have a local partner, because they know the market, they know IP, they know the legal framework in Portugal, they can explain you the terms and conditions of our contracts. So from our experience, we think this could be beneficial to you to have this local partner if you are interested to bid here for the first time. But one of the things I wanted to say is that this is not a precondition for you to bid. If you think you are capable for doing on your own, you can do it. And also this is not value in our bids. You know, in some countries you say, okay, if you have a local partner, you have extra points. None of it applies here. You can come, but this is just from a point of view of being easier for you to join because, you know, it's the first time you enter in a country. I think this is in Portugal and elsewhere. This is not a rule that applies only here, but in all other geographies. So I think this is the end of my presentation. So I will pass the floor to João again.
Helena, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And perhaps now we go to the next phase, Q&A session. I will look for some questions that are on the QA. And I think because you just finished with signaling and telecommunications, we do have a question here. And the question is, why have IP decided to exclude signaling and telecommunication systems from the PPP contracts?
Okay, thank you, Jean.
I think, sorry. Please.
Yeah, so yeah, I had that on the slide, but of course I didn't talk about it. But there's, as I explained to you, so the payments to the concessionaire will be based on the availability of the assets. So what we came to the conclusion, based on our benchmarking, is that on a high-speed line, around 60 to 70% of the unavailability events are caused by the signaling and telecommunication systems. But when you, for example, when you look at the cost, so how much these systems represent in terms of the total investment on a high-speed line is quite small compared to the total cost of the projects. So when you go to a bank and you ask the bank to finance you and you say, okay, there's this system for which you will, you know, finance a small proportion because it's a system that is quite small compared to the rest of the project, but then the payments we will receive from the grantor might be significantly affected by the unavailability of these systems. The banks don't like that because then there's no certainty on the payments they receive. So we preferred to exclude that, to de-risk the contract and making more bankable. So when finance institutions look at this, they say, okay, there's not much risk in here because when we look at the type of assets that need to be maintained, you know, apart from catenary, there might be issues in there, but that's okay, it's manageable. But the signal and telecommunications are type of systems that sometimes you cannot control. It's a bit of more of unknown territory. And this is why we prefer to do this. Of course, by doing this, we have two separate contracts and there's a very important interface that needs to be managed. And the interface is going to be managed by us. We have quite a lot of experience. So, for example, we have talked to other colleagues that are developing high-speed projects in Czech Republic, in the Baltics, and they say, okay, but we don't know how to manage this type of interface. So then you say, okay, then put everything together, because if you don't know how to manage this interface, this is cause you problems. So don't do it. In France, for example, they were quite surprised, but then at the end they say, good, we have put it together on our PPPs, but we think you are absolutely right. And if we were doing it now, we will do it differently because we understand the problems of putting the two things together. So this was the main reason why we did that.
Thank you, Elena. And another question is regarding land acquisitions. So this issue, so in the PPP contracts, the land acquisitions is on the side of the concessionaire. And does it represent a huge risk to the concessionaire itself? Or I think the question is, how could this issue impact on the side of the concessionary and then also in the project?
Okay, so here it is the responsibility of the concessionaire, and the reason here, there's two aspects here that are interesting to mention. There is, first, before we are doing these rail PPPs, we did in the 90s 21 PPP contracts for roads. So most of our highways, we are talking about a very extensive length of highways were built through the PPP model. And first on those contracts, we had the land acquisitions on the side of the public sector, and it went really bad. So at some point, we passed it to the private sector, and they did a much better job than we did. So this is something, again, that depends on geography. Because, for example, here in Portugal, imagine you need to build an high-speed line. So what you need, a piece of land. So the first thing you do is you declare this piece of land as of public utility. So that means the moment it's declared as public utility, the land needs to be available. So you can take the person out, the owner out of this piece of land. So maybe later on you can negotiate the price, the things, but you have access to this. This doesn't happen, for example, in the Baltics. They say this is a huge problem to us because we can spend 10, 20 years debating for this, and we don't have access to this land, so we cannot build the line. So there's no way we could pass this risk to the private sector. Here in Portugal, that doesn't happen. In Spain, is very similar. It doesn't happen either. So this is something, again, when, French companies came and talked to us about this, they said, oh, we are very concerned about this. So we said, talk to a Portuguese lawyer. They will explain to you how land acquisitions, how is the legal framework around land acquisitions in Portugal. They spoke to them and they said, very clear, we are okay with this risk. We understand it now. We are willing to take this risk. You are right. This is better that we do that. Because one of the things as well is we do a preliminary design. So we choose an alignment, but the concessionaire can optimize this alignment and they could move it a bit to the right, a bit to the left. Then they don't need that land, they need other bit of land. And if I'm doing the land acquisitions, I said, no, but now I have only this piece of land and you move the alignment to the left. So then they can do it, they do everything, they do the design, they do the land acquisition. So everything is done by one party. So this is the main thing. And we have no complaints about this because they understand that this is not a risk under the Portuguese law. It can be different elsewhere, as I said. When we talk about, I think one important thing, when you talk about risk allocation on this type of contracts, there's not one model that serves everyone. So you need to look at the market characteristics, the risks, the legal framework, everything, so that you can decide who is the party that can better handle that risk. So it's like a cost benefit assessments for each type of risk that you need to do. A value for money assessment. Yeah.
Helena, thank you. I have some more questions here. And one of them is regarding the Portuguese National Investment Plan 2030. And the question is that this plan, the forecast, what is shown, the investment forecast, is for 2030 to 2040 or 2020-2030. I mean, but I think the answer is it's all that is now planned, but I'm not sure.
Yes, I think initially it was 2020, 2022. This plan was announced in 2020, so the idea was for the decade. But of course, things have moved. As you see there, the high speed, it's planned to end in 2034. Other projects might be completed. Now we are in 2026. So looking there, I doubt that most of these projects will be finished by 2030. Of course, some of them has been delayed, also because the previous program, there were significant delays on its implementation. So things moved a bit. And exactly because there's no more capacity in the market. Because as I said initially, I'm an example of this. So I started as a railway engineer, and after 4 years in Portugal, after I graduated, I need to move abroad. And I lived 11 years abroad because there was no rail projects in Portugal, because there's no investment in rail. And 4 years ago, I moved back because of the high-speed project. I was invited to lead the project, but I was abroad for 11 years. And many of my colleagues did the same. And most of them are still abroad. They didn't come back. So there is shortage in terms of resources, and of course this Ferrovia 2020, in the last years, this knowledge has been building up, but the number of resources is still very limited. So we cannot do magic without people to work. We cannot go faster than this, and this has been an issue. But this program, some of the things are already moving on, others are late. So I would say ideally this should be all implemented by 2035. I would say. But it's a plan for a decade. So it was meant to be 2020 to 2030, but of course, there's still a lot to do in there.
Because the question has a second part, and is how much have already been awarded and how many projects are still open. But I think what you've shown on that list from project is what are open.
Not only, some of the things have already been tendered. I see here, for example, on rolling stock, CP has also bought some trains for long distances, high speed as well. They launched the tender. So I don't have the exact figures. So my colleagues will have from, that the ones that monitor these investments, they will have, I don't have the figures on top of my head, but certainly for the high speed, I know that is the main problem in there. But I could give you an overview, going through this list. I can provide you a list that has an indication of what are the projects that have already been tendered. And if they have not, when they are planned to be tendered. I can provide you that information.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you. So regarding equipment, there is a question regarding solar illumination being considered. And if yes, it is included in signaling and telecommunications, or will be procured directly by Infraestruturas Portugal. If you have any.
But this applies to, sorry, I'm not be an expert on this topic, but this applies, for example, to stations. So I would say, so is this the case? Because, for example, when we do the evaluations of bids for the PPPs, so because they have to do works and build new stations or reconfigure existing stations, so when we do the evaluations of bids, we take 80% is the price and 20% is based on quality, the final evaluation. So on quality, we look at aspects like how is sustainability included in these bids. So I know that most of the bidders have proposed this type of systems as a way to show, okay, this is, you will have this reduction on the electricity bill of the station, big bill of the station, because we are going to install these panels and these type of things. So this applies to the stations, but it's up to the concessionaire to then implement these type of systems on the stations, because they are responsible to do the works on the stations that will be served by the high-speed trains.
Okay, Elena, just several points, but I think you can summarize very quickly. So one of them is it's asking an opinion about which are the industries that are greatest demand from abroad, or that means what kind of expertise do you think is mostly looked, knowing the Portuguese market, that could be the most required, and if there is expectation of technology transfer the result of this program. So, but if you can say some sentences here.
Yeah, I think in terms of project design, I think this is one of the areas where we lack a lot of resources in Portugal, and can be a big constraint, because if the projects are not ready, you cannot start construction. Or if they are done and you need several iterations until you get the project right, that consumes a lot of the time you have to implement this project. I would say in terms of construction, of course, it's always difficult for a foreigner company to come here and to bring all the machines, machinery, labor. Of course, this ends up being more difficult. And this is why on our bids, we have seen construction companies both from Portugal and from Spain, but because the Spanish companies, they are just here, across the border, and they are very used to work in Portugal. And some of them, they have local representation in Portugal as well, despite the fact that they are Spanish companies. But I will say, for example, we worked with a company from Austria doing some studies for the tunnels. That, of course, we don't have this knowledge. We don't have rail tunnels in Portugal. So this is something, of course, that could be very valuable because, okay, of course, you guys have a lot of expertise in these and we don't. Signal and telecommunications, telematics, I would say it's always very, very important. Of course, in signaling, we always have these big names, Siemens, Thales, Hitachi. So they always come, but, other companies can come as well. We lack engineers, I would say. A lot of engineers, skilled workforce are very required. But I think in all areas, to be honest with you, as I said, I think when it's to build roads, we still are very capable of doing so, and we never lost. This was never something that, the investment has been quite stable when we think about the roads. Potentially now it's decreasing compared to the investment in rail, but in the past years it was always the opposite. So any company with rail knowledge, regardless of what it is, could really help us in this process and implementing these investment plans that are very, very ambitious, as you can imagine. As you probably saw when I was showing you the project schedule, you're probably thinking, she's crazy. This is never. They will never be able to do all of this. We still believe we will, and we are still on schedule. So hopefully.
And I'm Portuguese, and I hope.
Yes.
So, Helena, one more question. I think you answered that. It's regarding rolling stock is a separate program. I think you said that, not included in IP. It's on the Comboios de Portugal CP part, but not only, I think, because another question is, will privately operated rail companies be allowed on these routes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely they will. And we already have interest from, in Portugal, their CP, the incumbent operator, they have launched 2-3 months ago a tender for the acquisition of high-speed rolling stock. So it's live. This tender is live. Then there's another company in Portugal that are very interested. Then in Spain, 1 or 2, in Italy as well. So we have been approached by a lot of these operators. So as you saw, in here, as I said, the PPPs is only design, build, finance, and maintain. It doesn't have operations. So we will still be managing these infrastructures. So we will be allocating the slots to the rail operations. And obviously, it's a liberalized market. So all the European rules in terms of liberalization will apply to these high-speed lines. So any operators are welcome here. Something I didn't say is that the line will be built in Iberian gauge. So gauge is the distance between rails. So this could be a handicap because you will need to have trains that operate on Iberian gauge. That could be probably an issue, but these trains exist. There are trains in Iberian gauge that run at 300 kilometers per hour or 250. And what we have discussed with the or rolling stock manufacturers is that the wheels can be moved to adjust to these. So this can always be an option, but of course this could be a restriction because if someone, in France, an operator thinks, oh, I have here some old rolling stock that I could move to Portugal and operate some services, it's not quite straightforward because of course that is interoperability issue that needs to be looked at before that happens.
Helena, I think we are almost finishing our time. Just there is another question here, but it's regarding rolling stock, design, styling, trains, and partners. This I would ask to write an email directly to us because we will try to contact CP because it's the company that will have this must answer these questions. So I think there is no more questions here. and perhaps the most important one is how can an Austrian company get in contact with you? And I think EP always show open doors, and as you said, you show also the bidding system from EP that is also clear, that how to get to know the open bids that are on the market. If there is no more questions, then I will finish, and well, that's wrap up our today's webinar. Elena, a massive thank you to you for your
You're
time,
welcome.
for your expertise, and for making this topic so insightful. So we really appreciate you being here, all of you. For those who join us, please note that this webinar was recorded and will be shared the presentation along with the contact information. So thank you all for being part of this. Elena, thank you very much for
Thank you. It was
your
a
time.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Auf Wiedersehen.